A lot of us sitting in this room didn't see this last crisis as it came upon us, but this one is really easy to see. The fiscal path we are on today is simply not sustainable. This debt and these deficits that we are incurring on an annual basis are like a cancer, and they are truly going to destroy this country from within unless we have the common sense to do something about it. This is a problem we're going to have to face up to in maybe 2 years, maybe a little less, maybe a little more. But if our bankers over there in Asia begin to believe that we're not going to be solid on our debt, that we're not going to be able to meet our obligations, just stop and think for a minute what happens if they just stop buying our debt. What happens to interest rates? And what happens to the U.S. economy? The markets will absolutely devastate us if we don't step up to this problem. The problem is real, the solutions are painful, and we have to act.
Your frustration and your cynicism, because while you've been carrying out your responsibilities, most of the people here, you've got a family budget. If less money's coming in, you end up making cuts. Maybe you don't go out to dinner as much. Maybe you put off buying a new car. That's not what happens in Washington. And you're right, there's a lot of blame to go around. But I think it's important just to remember a little bit of history. When George Bush came into office, we had surpluses. And now we have a $500 billion deficit annually. When George Bush came into office, our debt, national debt, was around $5 trillion. It's now over $10 trillion. We've almost doubled it. And so, while it's true that nobody's completely innocent here, we have had, over the last 8 years, the biggest increases in deficit spending and national debt in our history. And Senator McCain voted for 4 out of 5 of those George Bush budgets. So here's what I would do. I'm going to spend some money on the key issues that we've got to work on. You may have seen your health care premiums go up. We've got to reform health care to help you and your budget. We are going to have to deal with energy because we can't keep on borrowing from the Chinese and sending money to Saudi Arabia. We are mortgaging our children's future. We've got to have a different energy plan. We've got to invest in college affordability. So we're going to have to make some investments, but we've also got to make spending cuts. And what I've proposed, you'll hear Senator McCain say, well, he's proposing a whole bunch of new spending, but actually I am cutting more than I'm spending, so that it will be a net spending cut. The key is whether or not we've got priorities that are working for you, as opposed to those who've been dictating the policy in Washington lately, and that's mostly lobbyists and special interests. We've got to put an end to that. This administration has inherited a $1.3 trillion deficit, the largest in our nation's history, and our investments to rescue our economy will add to that deficit in the short term. We also have long-term challenges, health care, energy, education, and others, that we can no longer afford to ignore. But I want to be very clear, if the message was not effectively delivered by the 3 previous speakers. We cannot and will not sustain deficits like these without end. Contrary to the prevailing wisdom in Washington these past few years, we cannot simply spend as we please and defer the consequences to the next budget, the next administration, or the next generation. We are paying the price for these deficits right now. In 2008 alone, we paid $250 billion in interest on our debt, 1 in every 10 taxpayer dollars. That is more than 3 times what we spent on education that year, more than 7 times what we spent on VA health care. So if we confront this crisis without also confronting the deficits that helped cause it, we risk sinking into another crisis down the road as our interest payments rise, our obligations come due, confidence in our economy erodes, and our children and our grandchildren are unable to pursue their dreams because they're saddled with our debts. And that's why today I'm pledging to cut the deficit we inherited by half by the end of my first term in office. Now, this will not be easy. It will require us to make difficult decisions and face challenges we've long neglected. But I refuse to leave our children with a debt that they cannot repay. And that means taking responsibility right now, in this administration, for getting our spending under control.
The facts are very, very clear. The United States is heading toward a debt crisis. The only solutions will be truly painful for us all. That doesn't have to be our future. The way we respond to this challenge will ultimately define our generation. We can choose a path to prosperity. Let's take a look at how we can do it. Our debt as a share of the economy is already too high, but look at where it's going. These are actually pretty conservative estimates. We face a crushing burden of debt, which will take down our economy. It will lower our living standards. Actually, I asked the Congressional Budget Office to model the economy going forward. So they have these computer programs that simulate the U.S. economy. The computer program crashes in 2037 because it can't conceive of any way in which the U.S. economy can continue because of this massive burden of debt. You know, the economists tell us, when your debt gets to 90% as a share of your economy, you start slowing down and we stagnate. We prevent that from ever happening. Here's what would happen under our proposed budget, what we're calling the path to prosperity. As you can see, we won't come anywhere close to the tipping point, and we'll pay off the debt over time. So how will we do it? We will cut spending. Washington's unsustainable spending is driving the nation's permanent plunge into debt. Look at the growth of government under the current path we are on. The government grows to such high levels that by the time my 3 children are my age, the government will be twice the size for them than what it is for me. Our plan brings spending back down to the historic level of 20% as a share of our economy. Washington has not been telling you the truth. If we don't reform spending on government health and retirement programs, we have zero hope of getting our spending and, as a result, our debt crisis under control. Next year, the government spends 68 cents out of every dollar you pay in taxes just to pay for these health and retirement programs and interest on the debt. By the year 2025, they will consume every penny of every tax dollar you send to Washington. Our budget saves and strengthens these programs. It fixes the flaws in Medicare and Medicaid that have made rising costs nearly impossible to check. This is the only way these programs can hope to survive and function into the future. Look, we have a choice of 2 futures. We know the path we are on right now. That's the path the president's proposing. A debt crisis, no health and retirement security, a diminished future, a stagnant country, less jobs, less prosperity. That is not the America we know. We can choose this other path, but we have to make that choice. We can lift the crushing burden of debt off of our children and grandchildren, and we can get this economy growing today. It is up to our generation to pick this path. The question is, will we do it or not? It is up to us.
Closer than we have ever been to getting an agreement. There's no reason why we should not get an agreement. As I said before, we have now matched the number that the Speaker originally sought. The only question is whether politics or ideology are going to get in the way of preventing a government shutdown. Now, what does this potentially mean for the American people at a time when the economy is just beginning to grow, where we're just starting to see a pickup in employment? The last thing we need is a disruption that's caused by a government shutdown. You don't want delays, you don't want disruptions just because of usual politics in Washington. So what I said to the Speaker today and what I said to Leader Reid and what I've said to the 2 appropriations chairs is that myself, Joe Biden, my team, we are prepared to meet for as long as possible to get this resolved. We are prepared to put whatever resources are required in terms of time and energy to get this done, but that's what the American people expect. They don't like these games, and we don't have time for them. There's some things that we can't control. We can't control earthquakes. We can't control tsunamis. We can't control uprisings on the other side of the world. What we can control is our capacity to have a reasoned, fair conversation between the parties and get the business of the American people done.
There is a storm on the horizon, a time of hardship and pain. The war rages on. The network remains strong, but we will not quit. There is no fate but what we make.